Good afternoon. Nancy McWilliams here. Just wanted to provide you with some supplemental resources for the modules conversation in Module 2. Our main focus is on supply and demand. So Chapter 3 and chapter 4 really chapter 4 goes into the equilibrium and how we actually create a market. But my focus for today is actually talking about the terminology that's used in supply and demand. This is one of the areas where I find that a lot of students really struggle. It's not that we don't know what we're talking about, or because we have actually been consumers all of our lives and we understand supply and demand, but we necessarily don't use the terminology that economists do. So the purpose of our session, this video, is just to kind of reiterate some nuances with the terminology to help you better understand how to articulate your understanding about supply and demand. So the first thing we want to talk about is graphs. And so graphs always give everybody a really hard time. And in economics, we use them as a visual tool and such. Some courses go heavy into the mathematics of it. Slope is about the extent of what we're going to do, but you'll notice that when we're talking about supply and demand, that price is always on the y-axis, and it is the independent variable. This is the variable that actually drives all of the reaction, the action within the quantity on the x-axis. This is slightly different than where in regular mathematics, the independent variable would actually be on the opposite axis and such, but econ is special. And so therefore we are price is always on the y-axis. So as you're drawing your graphs, trying to really understand the supply and demand, you want to make sure that you're using that. I really encourage you to go through the MindTap module on the mathematics. It'll just give you a base of understanding, and then there's an appendix in the reading that can be very helpful for this section as well. So there is a difference between individual demand or individual supply versus the market supply. So market supply is calculated using a process called horizontal summation. So each individual person looks at a product and values it in a different way. And so, for instance, I usually use the example of my favorite snack cake, Little Debbie's. And I love Little Debbie's. I really shouldn't eat Little Debbie's, but I love Little Debbie's, and anything that's shaped like something that just really makes me happy. So Christmas trees are something. So at each individual price point, I would have an individual quantity demanded for Little Debbie's. Now, if myself and 3 of my closest friends talked about what they would be willing and able to pay for Little Debbie's at each one of those price points, then we could actually summarize and say this was this market segment and come up with the market demand. And this is one of the erroneous assumptions that a lot of people make, that this is the way I feel about it, so this is the way the market should be and such. But so we want to clarify that. It's the same way with supply. We're talking about the supply of all goods and services, of all of that particular product, and that can come from a variety of sources and businesses. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the law of demand. We're going to and the law of supply, and then we'll try to put them together a little bit and such. So the definition of the law of demand is that there is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. And we use the phrase ceteris paribus. This is one of my favorite phrases in all of economics. It means all things being held equal, holding all things constant, and it doesn't really work in the real world. We make decisions very fast and such. So we're going to ask you to slow down your thinking and really look at just the relationship between price and quantity demanded. So when I say that there's an inverse relationship, what does that mean to you? Well, inverse meaning they go in opposite directions. So when the price of a product, Little Debbie's, for instance, is at $3 a box for 6 units, a 6-unit package, versus $2 a unit and such, the higher the price, the smaller the quantity. And if the price comes down, then the quantity demanded would increase. It's important that we use the phrase quantity demanded here and such, and not demanded. And we'll see why in just a minute. Buyers have to be willing and able to buy the product. And so what makes you willing and able to buy Little Debbie's? Well, maybe you're not a Debbie fan like I am. Maybe you see alternatives. This is where chapter 5 in elasticity comes in and such. Maybe you only have so much income, and snack cakes are not something that's a part of your daily needs and such. And so you have to be willing and able to actually purchase or demand that particular product and such. And again, we want to focus on Cerebus paribus, that holding that relationship between price and quantity demanded constant, and then look at what might happen if one of those changes. We create a demand schedule that is a variety of price points. And so I'm just going to try to annotate real quick what I'm talking about here. And so if I draw a table and I put my prices on one side and my quantities on another. And I put all of the prices on one, then I could actually think about as an individual, how many boxes of Little Debbie's might I be willing to purchase in a month's time if the price was $3. So if the price was $3, I can honestly say I would probably only buy one of them. But if the price went down to $2, I would probably buy 3, and that's difficult to read because of the color. But if they were only $1, I would probably buy 6 and such. And so here we don't really have, as the price of the Blu-ray disc goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. And we can represent this by a downward sloping curve. So visually, this graph represents the individual inverse relationship of price and quantity demanded. And it actually shows not only the direction, but also the elasticity. So you'll notice that this gets a little flatter here and such. And that's because those $5 DVDs are the ones that we get on Black Friday versus the $20 plus items are the ones that are the new releases, limited edition type things and such. Now, one of the outside factors that affects Blu-rays is the fact that most of us are using streaming services. So we're not really buying a whole lot of Blu-ray players. In my household, the only discs that I'm buying at this point would be those limited edition movies, special collections, or some kind of a specialty nostalgic kind of thing where I might be willing to pay more for that and such. And this schedule, we create that schedule for each individual demand for a particular product. And as I said, we can use that to actually create the market demand by using a segment, adding up that horizontal summation. The way that we get that determination, what were we willing and able to do at each price point, how many quantity demanded do we have, is based upon this list of non-price determinants. This is one of the things that you should memorize, because whenever you see a question that's asking about income, income is one of the most driving factors of demand in our society. If you have an income, the more money you have, the more you demand in goods and services. Sometimes if your income goes down, your demand for inferior products would that particular product. It depends upon where your income is and such. But as our income increases, we can, in general, say that there'll be a demand, a higher demand for all goods and services and such. And so this is one of the most important things in the law of demand. Another one that's really important is our tastes and preferences. I know for myself, I eat a banana and a granola bar, and I actually prefer the house brand of the granola bars that I eat than I do the regular ones. The regular ones actually fit into my health needs, but because of my income, my tastes and preferences have decided that that's what I would prefer. Some items, convenience. Those of us who have the habit of stopping and get a soda on our way to work, or maybe a coffee, that sort of thing, is that more convenience or is it necessity? Would you be able to make that coffee at home, get that soda at home, and take it with you? Maybe there's a cause or a celebrity that you follow, and they're encouraging, their endorsement actually encourages you to want that particular product and stuff. Our tastes and preferences are a driving factor in the demand of any goods and services. Remember, these non-price determinants, they aren't price, but they are the help us determine how we value the price in relation to the product that we're looking at. So on the list for demand, our text talks about the number of buyers. We'll actually talk about this in module 4 as we're finishing up the micro section. Expectations of consumers can be really a big thing as we're moving toward the fall season and Christmas. What are the expectations of consumers about what goods and services are they going to be buying? The increase in prices of school supplies and tennis shoes and clothes and those kinds of things. And it's because there's going to be a higher need, or is there going to be a sale? When is there going to be a sale? Those sorts of things. And whether or not they're rational or irrational, it's still a part of it and such. The final thing that I want to talk about is the price of related goods. So it's not the price of the Little Debbie, it's the price of the related goods. So what are some substitutes for Little Debbie's? Well, there's the Equate brand, or the Great Value brand at Walmart, or maybe you go to Payless and so you're buying things there, or there's another grocery store, or you go to Aldi, an alternative there. If you see two products, or the question is asking about two products that could be conceived as substitutes, like Pepsi and Coke, some people are Pepsi people, I'm a Pepsi person, versus a Coke person, do we see them as being substitutes? And so how do we respond when there's a change in the price of one of an item that we see is Pepsi, as substitutes, excuse me. So let's say, for instance, that the price of Pepsi goes up. How does that affect the demand for Coke? If you see them as substitutes, if the price of Pepsi goes up, you'll buy Coke. You will not. So your demand for Pepsi goes down and your demand for Coke will go up. Okay. It's not the price of the product, it's the price of the related product. Same thing goes with complement goods. I use the example of chips and salsa here. I think the only good reason to have salsa is to eat with chips. And so, but my favorite salsa runs about $7 to $8. And so salsa very rarely goes on sale. But chips go on sale regularly. So if they're regularly $1.99 a bag, and they go on on sale for 10 for 10, and so you get oh, chips and salsa sounds really good. You still pay that higher price for the salsa. So how are you responding to the price of salsa or the change in chips to make that purchase and such? So it's the price of a related good. If any of these non-price determinants are changing, then we use the phrase change in demand. And this is where the conversation really gets confusing for most consumers, because we usually use these two phrases, change in quantity demanded and change in demand, as being interchangeable, but they are not. And it goes back to what actually changed, what caused the change. So if the price changed, the price of our little Debbie's, the price of the Blu-ray, if it changed, nothing actually changed in what you were willing and able to do on the demand schedule. You just moved from one point to another on that same demand schedule or curve and such. But if one of those non-price determinants changed in some way, shape, or form, then the entire demand curve would actually shift. We're going to see that graphically by using the phrase increase in demand is a shift to the right, and a decrease in demand is a shift to the left. And we want to use shift right and shift left because the same change happens in supplies, but because it looks different on the graph, then we could use it. It can get confusing. So we want to make sure we remember which one is our right and our left, which I forget on a regularly, then increase or decrease and such. So for instance, if our tastes and preferences changed and a new celebrity endorsed those little Debbies, maybe they updated the branding. And so Debbie is a more modern Debbie than what she has been. And so now we're like, oh, we have to buy Debbie's. Then that would actually increase the demand for all Debbies because we want to be connected to a more modern product than the old-fashioned little Debbie and such. Now that's a really kind of silly example and everything, but we can look at other examples of things that could change with these non-price determinants. So I'll turn on the comments so maybe you can give me an example of what you might see as causing a shift in the demand curve from something that this listed on this list and such. So in summary, and this is a summary that's in your book, it's better to understand that prices that are changing and either increasing or decreasing are just a movement along the already established demand curve at each price point. And remember, you need at least 3 prices to be able to create a curve or a line. And you can calculate where you would be at any point in time. Those non-price determinants are going to cause either a rightward or a leftward shift, whether it's an increase for a rightward shift or a decrease, which is a leftward shift. And one of those things would have to change and such. So supply sometimes is a little bit more complicated because, again, we want to not think about demand. We just want to think about supply. We have to put on our businessman hat and such. We are not always the business person. So depending upon what your experience has been, where you're at in your life, maybe you have more knowledge or less knowledge than someone else, but pretend that you're the entrepreneur, that you're the owner of the business. And so the only thing that you know at this point in time is what is the price of your product that you're going to get from your consumers and such. And so the law of supply says that there's a direct relationship between the price of the product and the quantity supplied by businesses, all things being held equal. And so based upon your knowledge right now, you know about the price, how would you react? Well, they would move in the same direction. So if I'm going to earn a higher price on a product, I would be more willing to provide a larger quantity supplied at that price point and such. If I'm going to get a smaller price, then I would reduce the quantity supplied and such. Now, what I'm willing and able to do makes the assumption that you know about your costs of production, which we'll be talking about in Module 3. We'll be talking about market structures in Module 4. It has a lot more nuance underneath that. So remember, ceteris paribus, holding all things constant, what do we know? And right now, all we know is the price of the product. And so, again, we're not talking about one individual supplier. We're talking about all supplier concern. So most of our non-price determinants are determined by cost of production and such. Now, I think the biggest one that we think about for why a supplier charges what they charge is the price of resources. And post-COVID, we've seen the price of some resources go up extreme amounts and such. But then there are also some other factors that come into play as well that would explain why suppliers, why businesses are charging larger and larger prices for their product and such. And those may be related back to expectations of suppliers, whether they be rational or irrational, the number of competitors that they have, and what their business is structured like and such. What kinds of taxes, what kind of business is it? Is it an LLC or is it a single sole proprietor or a partnership? What kinds of organizational situations may it be and such. The price of resources comes from those factors of production. So land, labor, capital goods, those things that make other goods, and entrepreneurship, what amount of profit is required by the owners of those factors of production and such. So the higher the cost of production, then the lower this supplier would actually provide at any one price point and such. Costs of production tend to lower the supply of goods and services. And that includes all of those factors of production and such. Technology really affects our productivity. And so more technology can actually encourage lower costs of production. And so it encourages us to have higher process, and we're able to be more productive. And then again, prices of related goods in production. And so this was an interesting one and such. So it's not the price of the product, it's the price of the product in production. So if I use all of the same resources to make blue jeans as it takes to make denim jackets, so denim, zippers, rivets, sewing machines, people, those kinds of things. But the per unit price for a denim jacket is higher than the relative price of a pair of blue jeans, then I may, as a supplier, I may make the choice that I'm going to make more denim jackets because I can make more money off of them than I will blue jeans. Doesn't mean that I won't make blue jeans. I just will make less of those and such. And so we substitute in production with the same resources. You could also have complements in production, things that are made alongside each other. And the example that I use is usually around food, donuts and donut holes, cookies, broken cookies. You know, oftentimes, did you know that gourmet cookies taste as good when they're in a whole circle or a whole shape as they do if they're in pieces? And so we've actually been able to create a market for broken cookies by putting them on flurries or concretes or whatever your favorite ice cream mix-in is, and that sort of thing. Same way with donut holes. Donut holes actually have a larger per unit price and such. And they're fun, but the cost of donuts would actually encourage you to make donuts just so you have donut holes at times and such. So these are some of the non-price determinants. Depending upon the text or the reading that you do, if you look it up on the general internet and such, you may see other non-price determinants of supply. Our text uses these. And so I encourage you to also become familiar with this list of non-price determinants. I recommend that because as you're reading the questions for this week's quiz and such, if you see one that talks about the price of aluminum for a computer, you're going to automatically know that that is a factor of production in creating a computer that's related to supply, and it's not related to demand. So then within the options for the answer for that question, you're looking for something that does that changes supply. So here's an example. If the price of aluminum goes up, how does that affect the supply of computers? Well, so if your factors of production, your costs of production have gone up, then the supply of computers would go down and such. And that would be a leftward shift. You're going to see that upward sloping curve, just like we saw for the Blu-ray. As the supplier, as the price decreases, the quantity supply decreases, and this shows an upward sloping curve for that particular product. Again, changes in our phrasing about what caused it. So if the price of computers changed, we would move from one point to another. But if the price of aluminum to make those computers changed, then that's a non-price determinant, and that would actually cause a shift. That increase in costs of production would actually decrease the supply, and so we would see that as a shift to the left. It is going to look different because you have an upward sloping curve. So when we look at this, you see that the leftward shift of this curve would actually look like it's going up. But in reality, if we look at any of those price points, say at $10, we go from producing 35 units to producing, what does that look like? 17? If we have $15, we go from 45 units to 27. And so that tells us right there that we've decreased the supply of the curve. Again, a movement along the supply curve is caused by a change in the price point, but one of those non-price determinants would actually shift it to the right or the left. In chapter 4, we go more into equilibrium and how do we clear the market. And if you have questions about that, please feel free to let me know. Remember, if the market is working effectively, then it will clear, and even if we have a surplus or a shortage. But what we'll find out in chapter 4 is that sometimes those surpluses and shortages don't clear themselves because they're artificially created. So elasticity is chapter 5. We'll be talking about market failures also in chapter 4. This chapter really kind of gives us the basis of knowledge. It's one of the most important one in the entire semester. If you've got questions, please feel free to reach out. This was a long video, but I hope you find it useful. And if you have questions, that you reach out. Thank you so much again for watching, and best of luck this week. Have a good one.